Hey guys, welcome back to a brand new tutorial series. For those who already are familiar with the DevinLevelDesign Channel, you know that I primarily had worked in Unreal Engine 4, in UDK, though that was my primary tool and game development tool. But right now, in my situation, I can only really afford a laptop. My other computer that I was working on, it broke, so I don't have the money for new parts, so I have a laptop. And with this laptop, I can only really use, different tools. Unreal Engine 4 doesn't really run that well, so there won't be that many tutorials with that. But I decided to start learning more about programming, getting back into programming. And what I decided to start with was processing, as well as P5.js, but that's a separate topic. So this tutorial series is really going to be my attempt in kind of explaining while I learn processing, some tutorials about making games and processing 2D games primarily. So for this tutorial series, it does assume a little bit about programming. I will try to go as slow as possible, but I might go too fast for some people. But if you want to have a set of tutorials to follow, if you're a newcomer to processing or just a newcomer to programming in general, there's a lot of channels out there. One that I like a lot is the Coding Rainbow, and I believe it's called the Coding Train now. But it's made by a guy named Dan Schiffman. He's really smart guy, has really good videos, and explains things really well. He draws it out on whiteboards, explains it, and then also writes things in code. So definitely check him out. I'm going to leave a link to his channel in the description. And I'll leave a link in the description about how to download the processing IDE, as well as processing as a language, so you can get started and follow along. And processing, it is a language that is a lot like Java. It has some differences, but primarily it's pretty much Java. So that's the kind of language we'll be coding in. So what we're going to do in this tutorial series is recreate a game that I made. It's a really simple game. It's basically like a ball juggling game where there's a falling soccer ball. You click on it, pushes it back up, bounces around, you keep clicking it, keeps track of your score. If the ball goes underneath the screen, if it falls off the bottom of the screen, it resets, you start over, you keep playing. So just to give an example of that, I have that here. It also keeps tracks of high scores, so my previous high score was 8. Let's see if I can beat that. Maybe I will. The ball's moving pretty fast. Okay, I beat it. And also when the ball goes off screen at the top, we have like an arrow indicator, to help you keep track. And now my score resets. I have a new high score. And if I close it, reopen it, my high score of 12, it gets remembered, gets set, and you can keep playing. So the only real thing it's missing right now is sound. So I might just add like a kicking sound when you kick the soccer ball, but that's something that's not too important right now. So that's the game we're going to work together on to recreate. So let's go ahead and get started. Let's first, I'm going to cut the video here real quick so I can increase the font size, and then I'll come back. Okay, I'm back. So I increased the font size just to make sure you guys can actually read the text that I'm typing. So with any program with processing, at least from what I know, especially if you're making games, you need two primary functions in your main sketch, and that is the setup function and the draw function. And the setup function gets called immediately as soon as the program starts. So that's where you kind of want to initialize some things, set some default values, whatever you want to start out with. And in that draw function, the draw function is one that loops or keeps getting called over and over and over again every frame tick. So 60 frames a second, you're going to get draw called 60 times. So those are the two things we want to put in. So to write those out, you need to type in the keyword void, which means this function doesn't return anything. But if you want a function that returns a float, you would call float, return float, and write it like that. And you would have to do like return float. So that's how you would write something that returns something that's an actual value. But for setup and draw, they don't return anything. So we use the keyword void, and then type setup. And then function calls, they require open and close parentheses. And you also notice setup has this darkish blue color. This can change depending on what your editor setup is or preferences, but keywords will get highlighted in a different color than normal text. And because setup doesn't require any parameters, we don't have to type in anything in between these two parentheses. All we have to do now is do open, close curly braces and kind of push them down. And then you have to make sure you indent with tab or double space, whatever you want. I think you can also change the amount that's indented, but I believe the standard is 2. And then in here you would write your code, whatever you want to do. So let's do the same thing with draw. Do void, draw, open, close parentheses, open, close curly braces, and just hit enter a few times, and you'll have your function. So in setup, this is where you typically want to set your canvas size. So that's pretty much the window that opens when you start your game. So if you hit tab, indent, the keyword size, open, close parentheses, and then curly brace, not curly brace, semicolon. That closes out that line of code. And the function size, it does require 2 parameters. The first being its width, the second being its height, both of which are measured in pixels. So if we do 600, 600, so that's 600 by 600, save, and then hit this play button here, we'll get a canvas that's gray, that's 600 by 600. Something cool you can do as well, there is a function called full screen. And you can only have either full screen or size in the setup at the same time. So to comment out the size function, just hit the backslash twice and it turns gray. That means the program will not read that line of code. And now if we run, the whole thing is gray. And you can hit escape to exit, but we don't want to do full screen. We just want to do something right now that's 600 by 600. And we can also change the background, use the color, by doing background, parentheses, semicolon, and then it expects a color. So background's a pretty cool function, because if you want a uniform color, and by that I mean black, white, or anything in between, any gray color, you can just type one value. So if I do 0, knowing the color range from 0 to 255 is 0 is black, 255 is white, anything in between is some sort of shade of gray. So if we do 0, we can expect our background to be black. And it is. If we make it 255, it's white. And if we make it 100, we have this grayish color. So background is also an interesting function because it really it's important to know where you should be calling this function, because you can call this function either in setup or in draw. And I'll show you the reason why you would want to call it in draw in a little bit, but this is something you can call in either setup or in draw. So now we now have our canvas. We now have a color for our canvas. So I'm going to put this back to 0 just so it's black. Let's go ahead and let's draw a circle. And we'll want to draw, you can draw a circle either in setup or in draw. It's definitely, you want to do it in draw, because if you draw an ellipse in setup, it's only going to get drawn once. So if we draw it at width divided by 2, height divided by 2, give it a size of 50 and 50. It draws it once, but it does draw it. But with objects that you want to draw and have move and update, you want to call it in draw, because like I said, draw gets called every tick. So 60 frames a second, 30 frames a second. So it gets called 60 or 30 times in a second, depending on what your frame rate is. So you don't want to draw it really in setup unless this is something that doesn't really update. So let's move this code into draw. And let's kind of look at what exactly we're doing with the ellipse function. The ellipse function takes in typically just 4 parameters. The first is its x position, second is its y position, the third and fourth are really just its radius. So basically we're drawing a circle that starts in the x position, width divided by 2, so halfway in the screen on the x-axis, and then height divided by 2 for its y, meaning halfway on the screen. So right now it's getting drawn at the center. And then we're giving it a radius of 50. So 50 and 50. So what we can do with this circle, we can change its color. And fill works the same way as background. You can just put one number, and I'll just do 255 by 255 by 255, or 000. The only time you would want to put all 3 RGB values in is if you want a color that's actually not black or white or gray. So if you want a red ball, you can do 255, but then you have to add 0 in the green, 0 in the blue. And it's read as RGB. So if we play this, we'll have a red ball in the center, like we do. And if you kind of look at this ball, there's an outline on the ball. So if you don't want an outline around the ball, you can call a function called noStroke. And it's camel case, so capital S, lowercase n. So now if we show this again, we don't have that outline. And what's interesting about fill and noStroke and a couple other functions is they will affect whatever shapes are drawn underneath them. So if I create another ellipse, let's do width divided by 4, height divided by 4, and we'll make it smaller, we'll do 20 by 20. Now we're going to have 2 red balls with no stroke. Obviously 2 separate positions because we changed that. So what if I wanted to make that smaller ball blue? What I would have to do before I call that second ellipse is fill. And 0, 0, 255. So red is 0, green is 0, blue is 255. So now we've got a blue ball and a red ball. But we don't want a second ball. For right now, we just want one ball. And we want to make it white, and we want to have no stroke on it. But what we want to do now, for this tutorial at least, is just show you how to make this ball fall to the ground. Or just drop. And one thing to mention before we do that is just how our canvas is drawn. So in a typical coordinate system, you have positive x, positive y, negative y. And that's assuming things start in the center. So y would be positive up, y would be negative down, left and right, negative x, positive x respectively. But the coordinate system that at least processing uses, I think a lot of programming languages do this as well, is the origin of our graph here is not in the center of our screen, it's at the top left corner. That's where 0, 0 is, x0 and y0. So as you move from 0 to the right, x is becoming more positive. So our canvas size is 600, so as you move to the right, you go from 0 to 600. With y, it goes from 0 to 600 downwards. So 0 at the top left, 600 at the bottom. So we just got to keep that in mind. So when we want a ball to fall down, we need to add to its y position. If we want the ball to move up, we got to subtract from its y position. So it's a little confusing, but you'll get used to it. So with that in mind, let's make this ball fall to the ground. What we need to do for that is, before we call our setup function and our draw function, let's just set up some global variables for this example. So when you make a function, when you make a variable, you first have to declare what variable type it is. So for our purposes, it will be a float. Then you gotta give it a name. Try to make it short and sweet, but descriptive enough so you know exactly what it's doing. We'll call this ball_y. And what you could do is just close it out, not even give it a value yet, or you can make it equal to like 50. If you don't give it a value right away, you would need to give it a value before you actually decide to use it. So we could get away with saying ball_y equals 50 in our setup. And if instead of height divided by 2, we set that to ball_y, our y position for our ball should be at 50, which, if you remember 0 being at the top, 50 down is pretty much close to the top. And there we have it. But like I said, if we comment out this, and we just set initially ball_y equals 50, we're going to get the same exact thing. So we'll keep it this way, where it's just float ball_y at the top, and then we initialize its value in setup. So now what we need to do in draw is somehow update the y position. And how can we do that? We could just add some value to ball_y, some arbitrary value. So what we could do, ball_y plus equals 10. And if we play this, at every draw, it's going to be moving down 10. So there's a couple things we need to talk about. First, we'll talk about what we're seeing on screen right now. And that's pretty much like a streak of white color moving all the way down to the bottom. Now, why does this happen? The reason why it happens is because we draw the background color black once at the beginning. And then each frame, we're drawing an ellipse at a certain ball y and ball x position. And it doesn't remove the old drawing of the ellipse. So, we draw it first at 50y, and then we draw it again at 60, 70, 80, 90, all the way down until it comes off screen. And without drawing the background, we get this kind of like paint effect, like you're drawing with a paintbrush. So if we want to fix this, we have to take our background function call and just make sure you put it somewhere before you draw the ellipse. So you put it in draw. Now we have a ball that drops. And something else I wanted to talk about, ball_y plus equals 10. What does that mean exactly? It is the same thing as writing ball_y equals ball_y plus 10. It's the same exact thing. It's just shorter syntax. So it's easier to say ball_y plus equals 10 instead of saying ball_y equals ball_y plus 10. A little easier to deal with. So always just write it like that. So that's where I'm going to end it for this video. In the next tutorial, what we will do is set up more functionality for our ball, but this time we're going to make it its own class, and we'll also make it accelerate, because right now this is a linear movement that we're doing right now, because each frame we're just adding 10 to it, so it's going to be 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100, from there and everything like that. Where instead we might want the ball to accelerate. So it'll be like 50, and then 65, 80, 100. So it just gets faster and faster and faster. And based off functions and variables that we'll set. So that's what we're going to do in the next video. So thanks so much, guys, for watching. Make sure to subscribe if you aren't already for more of these videos. Make sure to like this video as well and comment below any questions you may have. I myself am still new to processing too. I'm just making these videos kind of for myself, just to make sure I understand what I am learning, but I also want to do it just as a way to explain to new people how to use processing, because sometimes people who know processing or a topic too well, they may explain it in ways that make it kind of confusing for newcomers. So it might be easier for a newcomer to teach other newcomers as well. So thanks you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.